Nicole here. It seems like an annual event now when Terence comes. It's very challenging and inspiring for our community, and we're very happy to welcome him back again. Thanks.
It's good to be here. Well, this is the culmination of a dream of mine and sort of a departure from what you may be used to from me. I think inevitably this weekend will be a little more personal and maybe less cosmic than some have been, because I sort of have to open my private life to you, because what I'll be doing this weekend is basically sharing a friend. Last year I was here with Rian Eisler, but that was a marriage of ideological convenience. Not that it wasn't sincere, but we were drawn together primarily because our ideas were in congruence. Nicole and I, on the other hand, were drawn together primarily because our patterns of intoxication seem to be incongruent. We're going this weekend to talk inevitably a lot about the Amazon, the crisis of conservation in the warm tropics, vegetable medicine. Nicole is a world expert. She's spent over 40 years in the Amazon after a very complex and fertile time spent in the Far East before that. She's a storyteller, an ethnographer, and a personality of great depth, warmth, and uniqueness. And it's a pleasure to appear here with her. I first met Nicole in 1980 when I was part of an expedition to the Amazon that involved Wade Davis of Serpent and Rainbow fame, and my brother and Dennis and some other people from the University of British Columbia. And I had read Nicole's book, The Witch Doctor's Apprentice. This tells you something. This lady got in on it so early that shaman wasn't even a word, let alone a buzzword, when the first edition of her book came out. And I quickly discovered in Iquitos in 1980 that all roads seemed to lead to Nicole. If you wanted something done, if you wanted to meet somebody, if you wanted an obstacle cleared away with the Peruvian government or the university, Nicole was the person to see. And one of my weaknesses is for characters, and I've collected them in all times and places. My charm bracelet has such peculiar specimens as Ralph Abraham, Rupert Sheldrake, Nina Wise, Joan Halifax, unique types. I mean, they threw the mold away before they made these people. And Nicole fell into that category. So, in line with that picture of our mutual love of hell-raising, I have to tell you that we stayed up much too late last night, and so we're mere shells that sit before you this evening. Yes, and some of you, I understand, are mere shells. When I really feel like a mere shell, I feel like an old wasp's nest. So what I thought we would do this evening is we want to meet each of you. This is Roy Tuckman is on vacation this month, so we have an intimate group. If otherwise we would have had a financially successful group. So we trade one breakthrough for another. But what I would like to do this evening, briefly, is go around the circle and just hear who you are and what your interests are, and maybe a statement of your expectation or your hope for the thing. Make it brief. One cannot say often enough in these situations that lack of brevity is proof of psychosis. So please bear that in mind. 50 people are looking at you and wondering how balanced you are. So this is an opportunity to lead them astray. And I'll slyly organize it so that we come around, and then it will come to Nicole last before me, and then I will tie it all up if I can. So why don't we do that just briefly. Before we start, let me say we will have 3 meetings tomorrow, one in the evening, the other 2 in the obvious slots, and 1 meeting on Sunday. And all of these meetings will either be under the teaching tree, which is immediately outside, or right here if the weather turns bad on us. Tomorrow night's meeting will be here. So why don't we just quickly go around the circle and introduce ourselves. Michael, why don't you start?
Okay, hi, I'm Michael. I spend my time living here at the Ojai Foundation and at Omega Institute in New York. And Terence, his material and influences that he's been influenced by have been important to me as well. I love science fiction and I love Tai Chi. Glad to meet you.
My name's Leon. I also work here. Terence changed my life, to be honest. I'd always been rather scared of the psychedelics, and I met him at Esalen a number of years ago, and he was the first person who said something sane about them that really changed my thinking. And ever since, I've been greatly stirred, really, by his ideas, and they really impacted me a lot. So I'm very thankful to be here with you again.
Glad you're here, Liam.
I'm Julie Williams. I live down in the valley here, and I'm anxious to hear Nicole's story.
My name's Stephen. I heard you one day on the radio about 6 months ago, and it was the first time I ever had any validation on what was going on in the other world for me. And you verbalize it when you talk about it, and it's what I experienced. So it's just it's really brought some light into my life, and I really appreciate it. That's why I'm here.
My name's Elaine, and I'm here because I'm feeling a draw to be shamans and get reconnected with the earth and make a contribution where I can be helpful.
I'm Marilyn Love. I'm a work scholar here at the Ojai Foundation, and I'm especially concerned about the threat to the tropical rainforest.
My name's John Wymore. I'm from Albuquerque. I'm a temporary part-time staff member. I'm anxious to find out who the hell you are.
Me too.
So I'm Joe Lasowski. I'm a painter, fine arts. I started doing psychedelics with weed show Indian maybe 20 years ago, and I met Terence. It was like a meeting with shaman at Esalen maybe 10 years ago.
My name is Christopher, and I have an interest in the Amazon and psychedelics, and very often haunted by Terence in terms of the radio and other media.
My name is Nina, and I'm a performance artist and old friend. And I expect the unexpected.
Yes, Nina. Nina introduced me to my wife, and it's been unexpected ever since.
And I'm really delighted to meet Nicole. What is a pleasure and honor.
I'm Faustin Bray. With Brian Wallace, we composed sound photosynthesis in a band called Into It. We produced Terence and Kat and many other folks around the town that you have come to know and love. And it's great to be here again. We were here last year with Ralph Metzner and Terence for our first time in Ohio, and I'm glad to be here again this year.
Brian, music and this kind of stuff, and I'm quite happy to be with these great characters.
My name's Elizabeth. When I was 37, on my birthday, I heard a voice inside my head say, from now on everything will be in reverse. And to point it up, while I was driving about a half a mile from my house, forward gear went out and I drove home in reverse. So I feel very comfortable with the archaic revival theme.
My name is Jane, and I also live in the valley, and I'm very grateful to be in your presence and looking very much forward to hearing, especially Nicole this evening. Thank you.
I'm Pat Danish. I'm a painter, and I work here. I'm very curious and interested in the other parts of reality that I touch upon in working with art and the psychedelics.
My name is Ingrid. I'm a work student here. I'm coming from Vienna, Austria, and I'm here in your workshop because I have heard many interesting things about Nicole and you, great things, and now I will find it out myself what is true about.
My name is Anne, and I'm an artist, and I live in Ohio in Santa Monica, and I've heard enough that I'm fascinated by this information and looking forward to hearing more.
My name is Kevin, and I came because I got somehow I got on the mailing list, and they sent me this out, I looked through them, and this one looked really interesting. So I have no expectations. I heard Terence speak once down in Los Angeles, and that was interesting. So I'm looking forward. Well, if I'm looking forward to it, then that's an expectation. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it anyway.
Welcome.
My name's Gary, and I work here at the Ohio Foundation. One of my interests, I guess, would be what the source of hallucinations are, or where they come from, and what sort of structures in the mind and how they got there.
My name's Terence and I live in Los Angeles, and I like plants, and I like to grow them and deal with them and see them grow. And I like to hear Terence talk about plants.
My name is Joy Alex, and I've listened to Terence's tapes. That's how I first got word and loved all the food for thought. And what more?
My name's Carl. I'm a physician from Orange County, and here out of curiosity and looking for insight.
My name's Alan, and this place is a spiritual home for me and my wife. We come here a lot, and it's good to be here. And Terence is always a great pleasure to be with. I like to think of him as the Abraham Lincoln of consciousness. Among other things. And it's particularly exciting to have an opportunity to meet Nicole and have a chance to spend some time with the two together.
Finish.
I'm Marion. I'm an old friend of Terence's, and I'm happy to meet Nicole. And I'm interested in the stories about the forest and the Amazon.
Good. My name is Randy, and I'm not familiar at all with Nicole, but I'm familiar with Terence and the Amazon, and what we're looking forward to. Something we haven't heard yet, I guess. I think we've heard quite a bit.
You've heard quite a bit already.
My name is Diane. I'm an artist, and I've been having this wonderful experience since I've seen you for the first time this evening. We've been listening to True Hallucinations, and I've seen your photograph, and some very strange phenomena is going on for me, because hearing you speak, I mean, I heard you speak as I was going down the path. In my head, it's sort of full of your words, but it was coming from a speaker. And I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but it is a very strange phenomenon, a true hallucination.
He lives.
Hi, I'm Max August. I'm a therapist, and I'm interested in consciousness and what time, space, and reality are all about. And it seems like you've got some things to say about that.
My name's Daniel Siebert, and I'm a plant grower, and I run a partnership with a girlfriend in a sweater business, and I received an itinerary of Terence's a couple of months ago, and there was an asterisk next to the Nicole Maxwell event, and down at the bottom it said, "Should be very interesting." So that's why we're here.
My name is Ellen, and I design sweaters, and Daniel left out part of what he does, which is he has a magical plant business, and we're very interested in plants from the Amazon and with psychoactive effects.
Yes, Daniel and Ellen have a business which is one of the few places in the United States where some of these psychoactive and medicinal Amazonian plants actually find a commercial outlet.
I'm Laurel, and I'm from New Hampshire, and very much of a child to the full consciousness. I'm looking for some new answers to old problems, or old answers to new problems, whichever one you get.
Hi, my name is Bob. I work at the Ojai Foundation, and I've gotten a lot of different perspectives on your work from the staff here, and I found it rather intriguing. So it seemed like something I'd like to hear more.
My name is June, and I am here because I like being with people of like mind. And I'm very interested to hear both of you speak. I write, therapist, and do artwork, and I think I'm in very good company.
I'm Candace. I'm an artist as well, a sculptor, and interested. I heard Terence on KPFK the first time, and wrote to the Ojai Foundation for tapes, and that's how I do this whole book. And what Terence has to say just fascinated me because of where I go when I'm doing my artwork, and what state of mind that I get in to do my artwork. It seems to have a great deal of camaraderie with what he speaks about.
My name is John. I live here at the foundation. I'm interested in the nature of the mind, especially the mind, before it became so overloaded with symbols. At this time, I don't think we have the possibility really to look at that mind without looking through the veil of symbols. And I'd like to see through shamanism, which goes back perhaps 40 or 50,000 years, a time when maybe the mind is much more quiet. through that, maybe I can find something out a little bit more about the mind.
I'm Joan. Thanks to Nina, I met Terence about 15 years ago, and he continues to charm not only me, but an increasing number of insane people. I'm an anthropologist, and I've had a long relationship with visionary vegetables. And I'm very interested and examining in many ways, personally and in other ways, the relationship between indigenous peoples and endangered environments.
I'm Gigi. I'm currently MC and part of the backup band for spirit artists at the Ojai Foundation. I am interested in, I would say, events and people, ideas, experiences that help deepen our sacred relationship to plants, to all life. And I'm particularly happy to see Nicole here as a welcome coming back from a women's retreat to see such a fine, distinguished woman here is another homecoming to accompany such a fine, distinguished young man as Terence.
What an Irish tongue you've got.
My name's Jim. I'm a part of a small company that develops socially responsible business ventures. For many years we've been doing business with the Soviet Union and recently become involved in Brazil because we believe that part of the answer to the preservation of the rainforests is the development of commercially viable businesses that support the culture and the preservation of the Amazon basin rather than its destruction. So I'm currently learning all I can about the Amazon basin to apply our business acumen to this whole task.
My name is Laura Jensen. I'm a contemporary artist. I've worked with visionary substances for 20 years. From South America also. On the path and studying shamanism for the last 2 years. And I'm looking forward to your new insights. And thank you for being here.
My name is Marina, and last year I went to the Amazon for the first time. I stayed for a couple of months. I went to Brazil, different parts in the Amazon. I was particularly interested in the preservation of the rainforest and preserving the plants. I got involved with a group of people who are working to save the forest. They do ayahuasca, which comes with dying. And so I've been working with them for the last year, and particularly interested in medicinal herbs, and that I've been registered nurse in India, in Africa, also in different parts of the world. And the Amazon is particularly interesting to as much knowledge as I can get of what I'm looking for, and your name is like, been ringing in my ears for the last year. So I'm very curious to see what you have to say. I'm very glad to be here.
My name is Janet. I live here at the Ojai Foundation, and I'll try to take from some of your meals. And I came here tonight to hear some stories.
My name is Lynn Radcliffe. I've recently come from the East to join the staff at Ojai doing program work. And I'm a peace and justice activist from a long time, and that includes justice for the environment.
I'm glad you're both doing your work for it. And I'm always glad to see gutsy, avant-garde, way out ahead women. So I'm really glad to see you there. You're a good role model. Thank you.
My name is Pat. I live in Malibu and I came in Mexico. And I love the psychedelic realm and I love to hear you speak.
My name is Dushanka, and I was recently introduced to you via a tape at your presentation at Esalen, and I found it very inspiring, and I wanted to hear more. So I'm glad I'm here.
I'm Sarah, and I like to hear Terence talk, and I'm glad to hear Nicole talk.
My name is Lily, and I live here in the valley. And I have an interest in Amazon and hallucinogenic drugs from way back. I do production work with music festivals because I believe music is magic, and I have also interest in magic and the goddess. And I love to hear Terence speak because he always makes me laugh and I always learn something, and I thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to hearing you, Nicole.
My name's Lynx, and I'm happy to be here and haven't heard either of you speak before. Looking forward to it.
My name is Bob, and I recently heard Terence up at Esalen give a weekend series of talks, and I sent Dushanka that tape.
I had to give you credit for it.
I'm Eric. I'm semi-lucid insomniac, and I'd like information.
Thank you for sharing.
My name is Tom. I'm a registered nurse working in an emergency room in Ventura. Been listening to Terence for a couple of years and collecting and cultivating medicinal plants.
And I'm Terry. I'm also an emergency room nurse and fascinated with Terence and eager to hear Nicole.
I'm Pauline. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and we don't even know each other. And see, I study different forms of healing, and was in Peru up at Amazon last summer, and very much love the land, and I'm very interested in the ancient ways that come from the land.
Were you on the Napa, or where were you?
See, on the Amazon.
Oh, on the Amazon. Good.
I'm Chandra. I'm living in Ojai now. I'm the mother of 2 daughters. I've wandered around a bit around the world. I'm interested in good ideas, in consciousness. I love plants and the forest, and I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to listening tonight. I hope we get to you.
My name is Lola, and I live here, and I'm completely interested in the unlimited expanse of human consciousness, and I love to listen to Terence as one of the astral travelers in all those realms. So I'm happy to be here, and it's a pleasure to meet Nicole as well.
So Nicole, why don't you just take a few minutes and say whatever's on your mind?
Well, the first thing I would say, that I ought to, is I never really thought too much about the out of the ordinary experiences that we all have, because it seems so natural. And I've been with so many cultures now. I first went to the Amazon region in 1948, that is, as an expedition. And that was not at all for the purpose of getting medicinal plants. I wanted some excitement. I got it. And but But the one thing about that was I got hooked on jungle. It's the only thing I've ever been really addicted to. But I can't stay away too much. I get restless. And it does that to some people because, you see, it is an entity. It is not just a bunch of trees and rivers and mud and bugs. It, to me at least, and to most of the people who live in it, I'm thinking of primitive people, it is a very definite personality. And it has power. And so that is why I have to keep going back. My first trip did it. I got into a tribe who'd never seen a white skin before. They didn't think much of it. They took my hand and went this way. And then they said something and everybody broke up, just howling. And I kept saying to my guide, "What'd they say, Alfredo? What'd they say?" And Alfredo was laughing so hard he couldn't say. But he finally dried his eyes and said, "He says, that isn't white paint, it won't come off. She's really got skin like a fish and eyes like a fish belly, so she's hideous." So that went my ideas of being the white queen of the jungle. And after that, I learned that these people were very different from other people I'd known in that you could really trust them anywhere. I was with a group of heroes. They're the ones who cut off the heads of people that they kill in battle and then shrink them. It's quite an easy matter. It's nothing particularly magical. They boil the head a little bit and then make a slit up the back and peel the skin off, delicate cutting around the cartilage, and sew it up again and then fill it with hot rocks, and smaller and smaller hot rocks, and then finally sand and they sort of model it and you get a nice little shrunken head called a sansa. And so well, some people have suggested it might be rather good for me, but they were. This was my first encounter with primitives, except for a very brief one in Laos, in Indochina, as it was then. And I discovered they wanted everything I had, of course. Safety pins were the greatest, the most popular. I had fortunately somehow got the idea of taking a lot of safety pins. And since the women wear a dress that goes a piece of cloth wrapped around and brought over one shoulder, rather chic, and fastened here usually with a thorn, safety pins combining the elegance of jewelry with modern technology were a great success. And they also rather sometimes wanted cloth. They weren't so sure. I'd taken a lot of gaudy stuff in. And, but they didn't, mostly they wear brown. Stuff they weave out of the native cotton. Cotton grows all over the place. And then dye brown and make into their clothes. But I could leave everything I owned spread out because you're always getting wet in jungle, getting rained on, or your raft. I was on a raft for that one because we'd gone through some rapids you can't take a canoe through. And everything out to dry, and I could go away all day, and they wouldn't touch a thing. They're very, very honorable. In fact, honor is all they've got, you see, because they have any possessions in a short time will get mildewed, or they'll be eaten by bugs, or they just plain rot. And so you can't be anybody important by owning things. You have to be it. You have to be the best hunter or the best warrior or whatever. And it works out rather well until our people come along and teach them lots of other things. But that was the first trip, and I learned to respect and admire these people very much. And I had to keep going back. So I'd been hearing about medicinal plants all the time I'd been in South America, which was by then 3 years, and that the Indians had wonderful remedies, and I didn't believe a word of it. I'd had a year and a half of medical school. And these savages couldn't know anything that my professors didn't know. That's what I thought. And it took me 3 years, I seemed to be a slow learner, before I could accept that they did have some remarkable things, and only then, because I fell on my machete and got a big gash in this arm. And I have a slight tendency to be a bleeder, and I was out in the bush, not very far from the house, and put on a tourniquet of a vine, and came back, and the interpreter, who was the administrator, that this was a property owned by the widow of a Peruvian, who happened to be a gal from Brooklyn, and it was way out of nowhere. It took the record for getting there by canoe was 5 days. And the borders of the property were one range of mountains and a river over here and that way. And so, but here I was bleeding all over the place, and they brought out a bottle with some tree sap in it, and put some on, but of course when you're bleeding like that, nothing will take. It doesn't stay there. And so they said, you have to drink some of this. And, well, I didn't want to be rude, so I drank it. It was the most horrible, acrid, made your mouth pucker, and in 3 minutes, about 3 to 4, I would say, the bleeding had quite stopped. And that was kind of interesting, so I thought, I had plenty of penicillin, I didn't have to worry about infection. But they told me that putting the stuff on it would stop any infection. So I thought, I'll see. And I put a few pieces of adhesive across it, holding it together, but I could see in between, because it got quite dry. And there was never any infection. There was practically no inflammation. In the morning there was a neat scab, a very narrow one, and it healed in a little less than half the normal time, leaving only a very slight scar. So then I had to do a little rethinking and decide that my nice arrogant position of our superiority in medicine would do a little reviewing. And from then on, I went after medicinal plants, and I found they have so much, and their psychedelics are just as important. As a matter of fact, I think there are rather more of them than is generally recognized, even tobacco. Chewing tobacco and swallowing it is very hard on the stomach, but you will hallucinate. I don't recommend it though, because there are far pleasanter ways. And they use those hallucinations so very routinely. They'll tell you, well, I didn't know what to do for my son, he was so sick, so I took ayahuasca. I mean, sometimes it was just one person alone in the jungle. Or I took any one of a dozen. And I saw those tigre attack my son. That's what happened to him. Or something like that. And it is so much a part of the life that you stop thinking of those things or the medicines as particularly remarkable. They're there, and you use them as you would use soap or any ordinary thing, but with greater respect. There is a very definite need that is manifested to respect the things you use, especially the psychedelics. I remember the first time I took home a piece of ayahuasca to plant in my garden. The shaman who gave it to me was a very nice friend of mine who lives quite near Iquitos in Picuruyaco. You've been up there, haven't you? And they have it's a little village, mostly of mestizos who, being, most of them aren't too far from a tribe themselves, and Nouveau Civilisé is very much like Nouveau Riche. They have great contempt for the poor, and the poor in what we consider culture. And so the Indians there are about 8 of them, Yagua, and Witoto mostly, and Bora. And they stuck together, and they took their things to the market and all that. And I didn't realize when I first got acquainted with them that 3 of them were shamans. And I didn't know that until one day one of them came to my house, and it was Vicente, who was quite old, and he was blind. It was very hard for him to get around, and he had to cross a river and then get on a bus or walk from Bella Vista. Is about 3 or 4 miles. And he had a little boy guiding him. It was raining. So I realized this was not just a dropping in to see a friend. And he sat down and he said, "You have to save me." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? What can I do?" He said, "They will arrest me for murder." I said, "Whom did you kill?" And he said, "I didn't kill anybody. It's Belisario." He said, "You know, I'm a witch." I hadn't known it. And he said, "Belisario's a witch too, and he's off on a trip somewhere." He had gone up the Marañón River, and Belisario had died. He got sick and died on his head. And he said, "You know, I know that they will say that I put a spell on him, and I sent a dart at him, and the police will come and get me and arrest me for murder." It was that matter of fact. And so I said, "No, they won't." And finally I had to say, "All right, I'll speak to the general about it. And I'll tell him you didn't do anything." And then he was at ease. But it's that much a part of it, the ordinary texture of everyday life in a great part of the population there. And so you get so that you get a little used to it, and you sort of accept it as, well, that's part of life. And I think it would do us all rather a lot of good to consider the possibilities. What do you think?
Sounds good, Nicole. I'm not going to let you off the hook so easily. I want to bring a little bit of this out. Your name is really associated with in the public mind, I think, with the contraceptives that are very much a woman's secret.
I remember somebody told me if I kept this up, I'd be called Contraceptive Connie.
Contraceptive Connie.
Not a title, I think. It wasn't Terence, it was Carstens, who was, I think, a Swedish or German anthropologist. In 1920, he was studying the Canelos Indian in southern Ecuador, and he wrote an article saying that the women took some plant which is called piri piri, and they swallowed it so that they could cohabit, as he put it in a refined way, with men and not to have children. And at the time he was attacked violently. In 1920, everybody said, this man's out of his mind, he's silly. It invalidated quite a lot of his very good work, because everybody knew that nothing you took by mouth could stop a woman from having a child. It'd be nice to know how many of our present beliefs make about that much sense. The more you see of jungles, the more you wonder about those things. And anyway, they were the hardest of all things to get. You see, all medicines, at the beginning at least, now that the acculturation process is proceeding at such a rate that the old taboos have worn kind of thin in some places. But when I first started doing this, medicine is magic, and magic is secret. You don't tell anyone. One tribe will be using a totally different set of medicinal plants from another tribe. Their pharmacopoeias will be quite different. They'll overlap a bit, but the Witotos will know a plant that will heal infected third-degree burns. I've seen this without any scarring. And the Okainas, who were even of the same language group, didn't know it, because an Okaina girl told me how a Witoto woman cured her, and her tribe hadn't known this. And they just keep it separate, it's secret, even when it's a friendly tribe and a somewhat related tribe. So it was it made it rather a sporting proposition to see how much you could work out of them. And being a woman and traveling alone made it a lot easier because there was no threat to anybody. I'd have a boatman and his wife, but that's all. And an interpreter that picked up at the edge of the language area. And also I'd travel in very inconspicuous and not necessarily by choice, rather ordinary and poverty-stricken way. And so that made it better too. You go in all with fancy equipment and a fine boat and half a dozen people, you're not going to get very far. Because they're too used to being put down. And that in itself is a put down, to go in looking very elegant. So I managed to get quite a lot of stuff, and it made it rather more fun, something of a game so you could feel you were pretty smart. And the one thing that even when I had formed a very strong friendship, I could not for years get anyone to tell me about was their contraceptives. I knew they had them. I knew because some medical missionaries had told me of cases in which a woman with malformed pelvis had had a terrible time giving birth, and they told her she couldn't have any more children. And in this particular case, the woman said, "Oh, that's too bad." And said, "Are you going to leave your husband?" "Oh, why should I do that?" The woman said, he's a nice man, why would I leave him? "But you can't have any more children." And she said, "I'll take some medicine." But she wouldn't tell what it was. And she never had another child. And over the time they were with them, there were about 4 tribes, four women in the tribe who had that same experience. And so they were convinced that oral contraceptives did exist and were effective. But at that time, I think it was about, when I first heard about it, it was about 1951, and before I'd even really started going after medicinal plants. And the contraceptives, oral contraceptives, did not get publicity and get on the market until 1960. So I believed them, and I thought it'd be kind of interesting to get them. But you just draw a blank when you mention them. In fact, you may ruin when you're building a relation with, you've gone into some tribes that's a little kind of far away and not used to white people, and maybe it hasn't seen them very often. And you're getting along fine, you say something about a contraceptive. Once I just said, I smell piri-piri, which is, and you know I've had 20 piri-piris for all different purposes, rheumatism, contraceptives, and some you wash your husband's pants with and he'll be impotent with another woman. And they're using for everything. They've got one for whatever it is. So, but every time, I even got myself practically thrown out a couple of times just by mentioning them. And so, finally, it took a long, long time, but you will eventually, if you keep going into different tribes and meeting different people, get a sudden understanding. It's like the leap of an arc between the 2 electric poles. And now and then it happens, and then you're really lucky. And so I did find a Hebrew woman who got them for me. And even then I had a very difficult time getting away with them. But we managed. And, well, it was very funny actually how I managed. I had been thinking about this. I was going up the Rio Corrientes. And there's a Hebrew, you've been up there?
Not the Corrientes.
And there's a Hebrew colony up about halfway up the river on the way to the Makusari. And they were having a great fiesta and everyone was getting very drunk when we arrived. And you don't want to hang around when fights are apt to happen when Indians get drunk. And so we went home with this one woman who was taking her husband home to clean him up. I think he'd been a little sick. And it is not considered bad manners at all for a man to get roaring drunk and throwing up, because that's part of the fiesta. It's almost a ritual. And so she and I sat and talked, and with me she spoke Spanish, very bad Spanish, and sometimes pretty hard to understand. But she did know a little. She didn't like my boatman and his wife, neither did I by that time. And so she wouldn't speak Spanish in front of me. In fact, I found there were 3 people in the tribe who spoke Spanish excellently, or at least intelligibly. That's excellent in the jungle. And she didn't. And when they had left, she said to me in Spanish, first thing she said, "Where's your husband?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't know that Indians had divorces then." I said, "Well, we are not married anymore. He is in one place, I'm in another place. He is no more my husband." Thinking I was giving a good shock, I said, "Oh, me too." So she had been married to a very brutal man, she told me, and he beat her and so forth. Finally he abandoned her to great delight. And her stepfather was the witch doctor of that tribe. So he told her, it was a long time before she was willing to marry again. She'd had a bad time. And her little daughter, there's no question of custody, the child stays with the mother in jungle divorces. And he told her that she ought to marry again, and she finally did find a man she thought who was very good to her, and he was quite an important guy in the tribe. He even had a pair of shoes, and they were bright yellow. And he was the only person only Indian on that river who had a pair of shoes. And he was an awfully nice man, too. And so she married him, but she would not give him a child. And I said, well, how did you manage that? She said, well, of course, I took the medicine. And I thought, oh, at last. And so she told me she'd give it to me when I got... And I was going up the river, and I said, give it to me when I get back. I didn't want it, for one thing, I didn't want to carry it around because I knew by then that anything that has to do with the giving or withholding of life, things that ease birth, ease labor, and they have some very good ones, and things that, and the contraceptives, and the abortifacients, they have very good things for abortion. All of those are so secret that you have to be awfully careful and awfully sure you're really in and intimate before you mention them. At least you did in those days. It's easing up now as they're losing their taboos, they're losing their culture, they're also losing their knowledge of the plants. So it doesn't help much. And so she gave them to me when I came back down, but they were having another fiesta, and the men were all sitting together at one end of the house. It was an Indian house. Has a trunk in front to climb up because they're built sort of on stilts because of the floods. And then just a platform and a roof. And nice and airy. And they were all sitting around there. It was raining. And the women got me the plants and I was just about to get them down to the canoe when some of the old men who were sitting in a little row in the back came over and looked at the plants and looked at me. Then they started talking, and my friend Tessa started explaining. It didn't work. And they said that she was looking very distressed, and so was Auntie. Her auntie had helped in this deal. But I had been thinking about this. I'd learned the trick from a man in Shanghai who had a hard time getting the best of his Chinese servants sometimes. And so, through the interpreter, I said, tell Tessa to tell them I already knew the names of all these plants. I knew all about them. So Tessa did, I suppose, and she spouted Hebrew. And the man said, okay, if that's the case, what's the name of this one? So I, through the interpreter, said, well, tell him, of course, I don't speak his language. So I couldn't tell him what this bench is in Hebrew. I don't know the word for bench. I couldn't tell him what the rain is, but I can tell him what it is in my language. It is a This one I think is a logarithm. And this one is an isosceles quadrangle. And it's a wild combination. And you know, they do sound magical. And they are magic to me. I don't understand them at all. And I got by with it. Because Tessa said, and the old witch doctor whom I had bribed by giving him a glass eye, with which he could, I figured he could sort of pull a few fast ones if he ever got in a problem with magic. And so it worked beautifully. And I left rather quickly and got them in the canoe and off we went. But that's how secret they are. And now
I'll let you off the hook. Thank you. Yes, well, I mean, I talk a lot about how this plant knowledge is being lost, even more quickly than the rainforest itself. And I think very few modern ethnographers have taken the time to learn it the way you have. And very few modern ethnographers have been able to gain the confidence of women the way you have.
They haven't tried.
No, they haven't tried. But I know horror stories of clashes between insensitive anthropologists and tribal groups.
Well,
where
you have to keep your antenna out all the time.
And you have to take your time and not be in a hurry.
I have been sometimes and got myself thrown out.
By being in a hurry. Yes, Nicole is the only white person I have ever met who has been able to convince me that they actually enjoyed being in the jungle. And Nicole does enjoy being in the jungle.
Well, why not?
There are 10,000 reasons why not.
It is the most exciting, the most beautiful, and the most sort of sacred, it has a spirit, a very strong spirit. And also you have the great pleasure of thinking, imagine me doing this, and feeling like somebody important.
That's right.
To yourself.
That's right.
And you know, I don't get that chance very often.
But I traveled years later to many of the same places that Nicole describes in her book, The Witch Doctor's Apprentice. And the model, let me tell you, for exploratory writing is you go nowhere and then you exaggerate when you write about it. And all these hairy-chested guys who are running around the Amazon with machine guns and helicopters inevitably exaggerate the difficulty. And if you read Nicole's book, it sounds as though the Amazon basin is just dotted with wonderful, clean, friendly villages filled with happy, fascinating people.
Oh, nuts. My books aren't phony.
No, that's what I mean. You don't exaggerate. But Sebastian Snow and some of these other people...
Well, I knew Sebastian. He came to my door and said, in Lima many years ago, somebody banged on the door. He was this nice little blonde boy. And he said, I'm Sebastian Snow, the Royal Geographical Society. I said, that's nice. I'm a fellow, too. I said, well, I'm not yet, but I'm going to be. So then...
No, well, I think the acid test for every Amazon explorer is how hard you find it to stay at Arica. And I became...
Oh, well, that was not...
That was a hellhole. Well, Alfred Russel Wallace in 1858 described it as absolutely unbearable. You had a terrible time there.
Well, not only that, I lived in a double boiler.
You lived in
Upper
one of
part
those
of one.
metal buildings
Yeah.
that they put up. Yes, so did I. Yes. Why would people put up with this kind of stuff unless they felt they were in touch with a living world?
Because the people they sent down, they didn't know. It was the Colombian police. And they sent down people who were from Bogota, grew up in Bogota, didn't know a thing about the jungle, and they sent them for a year and a half so they didn't have time to learn anything.
Very lonely boys from
very
Boyacá.
unhappy. And the thing that's bad about that place is that they have the most stinging gnats I have ever seen. 3 kinds of stinging insects that fly in clouds, really in clouds. And there are the little black gnats that make a blister. There are the little black gnats that make a bloody spot. And there are the tabanos, the triangular black flies.
This was the one we were trying to remember yesterday.
Tabano.
Tabano, yeah.
And they will eat through the heaviest jeans or anything else, and they make a very painful, burning bite. Of course, the mosquitoes are all on duty too, but they're less evil. No, that is the most important.
It's an awful place. Nicole visited La Chorrera long before I was there, even before John Sullivan was there. That's how out in front of the pack she was.
59.
You were there in 59. I didn't get there till 71.
They're a wonderful group of nuns and priests there.
Yes, I wonder how they're faring in the middle of the Coke Wars.
But I haven't heard they're killing any Catholic priests.
No, I think that airfield is very important to the Coconeros, and probably they strive to keep decent relations there.
Well, they're all Catholics too.
Oh yes, absolutely. The higher horror of the whiteness is certainly a Catholic trait. Well, let's see here. Let me... I'm a little off balance because I held a weekend at Esalen 2 weeks ago, and they allow the people who participate in the workshops to evaluate people, and I got dinged. And somebody wrote an evaluation and said Terence Mckenna is the William Buckley of the psychedelic left.
Good God!
And he needs to learn to listen. So you'll see me doing or trying to do a lot of listening this weekend. I have a kind of obsessive need to create a certain kind of closure, so excuse me for about 5 minutes and I'll do it. It's just to satisfy an itch of mine. It's the need to try and tie this all together and make some kind of sense of it. I mean, what does a plant that heals wounds have to do with hallucinogens, and what do these things have to do with a global planetary crisis in the ecosystem, and what does that have to do with each of us? Well, to create an overarching metaphor that can connect all this together, I think what we have to do is think in terms of the exhaustion of our own cultural forms. I mean, that's what we're living through, is a global dying created by the exhaustion of our cultural forms and the vitality of the cultural forms that we see in these so-called primitive, I call them pre-literate people. As Nicole pointed out, they have nothing. But what they seem to have that we cannot seem to get a grip on is a kind of dynamic equilibrium with their environment and peace of mind in the felt experience of the moment. These are the two things we don't have. As a society, we cannot seem to make peace with nature. as human beings, as individuals, it's very hard for us to be at peace with ourselves. I mean, I consider my own life the search for peace of mind. Forget enlightenment, forget shunyata, all this stuff. Just a little peace of mind would be a tremendous boon as far as I can see. So I really think that there's a confluence here of themes and possibilities. It has this richly plotted texture that always lets you know that you're in the presence of a higher order of things. It's that the shamans whom we admire, who we idealize, are seen to be at the center of this environment, the warm jungle, the tropics, the warm tropics, that we find it necessary to destroy. So it's a perfect image of us being at war not only with ourselves, but with nature itself. And, you've heard all about how the Amazon and the Congo Basin in eastern Indonesia are all being cleared and lumbered and turned into cattle ranches. This is a tragedy, obviously. We understand and can perceive the dynamics of that. But how to make sense of a situation where, as the World Bank and the IMF attempt to halt this kind of destruction, on the other side of the coin, the United States State Department and the DEA and these agencies propose and are planning to carry out the defoliation of the Waijaga Basin. So there's a schizophrenia here that is not academic. I mean, are we trying to get the patient well, or are we pulling the plugs one by one? We seem to be acting in both dimensions simultaneously. And I think it's because we have not in this culture awakened to the depth of the crisis that surrounds us. There's a lot of kind of self-congratulatory backslapping going around these days over the fact that communists everywhere are in hot water and have to admit that they did it wrong. And this gives a lot of satisfaction to people who feel that that means we did it right. We didn't do it right. They did it wrong and now admit they did it wrong. We do it wrong and have yet to even raise the possibility of turning away from what we are doing. The internal contradictions of Marxism were based on a false definition of what people are. People do not respond to central planning, hortatory propaganda, and stereotyping. Neither do people respond to an ethos of self-denial or a view of human beings that denies the fact that we have certain itches which must be scratched. So, I think that the collapse of Marxism is only the collapse of the outer edge of the societal and civilizing assumptions that we have made. After all, Marxism is nothing more than the millenarian retread of Christian millenarianism. And so is modern science, yet another secular retread of Christian millenarianism. So our culture is in trouble. Not trouble. We are at a terminal crisis, a bifurcation that it can only go one of two ways. Horror beyond your wildest imagination, or breakthrough to dignity, decency, community, and caring beyond your wildest imagination. Now, where do you look for models? Where do you go? The answer is so obvious. You go to nature. Nature has been playing this game for 3 billion years on this planet. We have been playing the game, we, the apostles of Christian scientism, for about 2,000 years. Nature has an economy, an elegance, a style that if we could but emulate it, we could rise out of the rubble that we are making of the planet. You know, it was the geographer Carl Sauer who said, man found the planet a climaxed primeval forest. He, and notice the gender here, he will leave the planet a weedy lot. A weedy lot. Well, now this is a metaphor where you change climaxed rainforest for weeds, but it's also true. By clearing land, we promote the kind of plant evolution that stresses very rapid seed production and annular cycles of growth. In other words, weeds. And this tendency to find perfection and then to leave rubble in our wake has haunted us for the past 3,000 or 4,000 years of our history. Now, with the ozone shield disappearing, with acid rain falling on the earth that can melt blocks of marble, with the CO2 levels rising, with the levels of strontium and chlorofluorocarbons, and you know the litany, we have now one last chance to fish or cut bait. And the place where nature has provided the models for how to respond to this situation is the climaxed rainforest. Only the climaxed tropical rainforest has the kind of complexity of signal transfer, movement of nutritional materials, movement of electromagnetic radiation that we find in the modern city. It is a cliche of modernity that the city is a jungle. The problem is it isn't jungle enough. And I think it's the task of the new shamans to take the metaphor of the jungle, which is a metaphor of tremendous wealth, tremendous variety, a tremendous outpouring of form and of energy and of potential fulfillment of various bifurcation patterns of flow, to take that and enrich our own lives with it. And the way this is done is by empowering the presence of experience. The main thing that you get with these so-called primitive, pre-literate people, and with people like Nicole, who have spent time in this situation, is they are in the moment. They know how to have fun. They know how to work. They know how to live. And the reason they understand this is because they are focused within the confines of the felt presence of experience. They do not live by abstraction. And abstraction is the knife poised at our hearts. We are so much the victims of abstraction that with the earth in flames, we can barely rouse ourselves to wander across the room and look at the thermostat. That's the level of disimpassioning that abstraction has laid upon us. Well, hopefully this weekend there will be passion. There will be an effort wherever there is abstraction to drag it down into the felt presence of the moment. I think basically what we are a kind of green anarchy, an effort to revivify social forms that have been atrophied in the West at least since the destruction of Eleusis, probably in most places thousands of years before that. This is our last chance. I have done the best I could in terms of trying to sift through all these options and, as a communicator, offer the best way out. And, I could only do my best. And so that's what you get. I can't preach scientism because I don't believe in it. I can't preach Buddhism because I can't understand it. The only thing I can preach is the felt presence of immediate experience, which for me came through the psychedelics, which are not drugs, but plants. It's a perversion of language to try and derail this thing into talk of drugs. There are spirits in the natural world that come to us in this way. And so far as I can tell, this is the only way that they come to us that is rapid enough for it to have an impact upon us as a global population. This weekend will be different because we will be hewing close to the source. Nicole is a priceless repository of information, more even than she knows. If I could declare her a national treasure, I would. The number, who knows what this woman knows? Who knows how much human suffering, the alleviation of how much anxiety lies in the hands of perhaps half a dozen people of Nicole's caliber who have paid their dues in these jungles. This information is flowing through our fingers and disappearing. In another 30 years, it will be all gone. Every time I go to the Amazon, I can feel the way in which it's slipping away. When my brother and I go off looking for these unusual hallucinogens, often we have the experience where when we finally find the person who claims they know what we're after, the line goes like this. Well, I've never taken it, but as a child I remember seeing my grandfather prepare it, and I think I can do it. If it weren't for us standing there asking that it be done, it would never have even risen into the gentleman's mind as a possibility. This is the knife edge upon which this knowledge is poised. If it can be saved, it gives me hope that we can be saved. If we can't save this kind of knowledge, we cannot save ourselves, because this kind of knowledge is ourselves. Culture is a garment which you put on. Medical systems are pieces of jewelry which you wrap around your throat or neck. Religious ideals are like objects which you push through pierced nostrils and earlobes. If we cannot come to terms with that which allows us to give birth with ease, to die with dignity, and to live in health, then what kind of a future do we have? No future at all. So this is not a meeting of obscurantists or enthusiasts for some private vista of transcendence. This is a meeting of political activists, people who are socially committed to themselves, to each other, to the larger idea of community, and who understand that when you talk about Gaia, it's only an abstraction unless you talk about plants. The division between the masculine and the feminine is only trivially a difference between men and women. It is fundamentally a division between plants and animals. Plants are the enveloping feminine matrix of control and refurbishment. Animals are something invented by plants to move seeds around. An extremely yang solution to a peculiar problem which they faced. So the archaic revival, if it means anything, it means reconnecting the Gaian mind, which is a vegetable mind, a feminine, enfolding, boundary-dissolving, planetary mind that is not an abstraction, not a stereotype, not something used to create hortatory propaganda, but a living, breathing reality, a reality which is the only thing which stands between us and Armageddon. we will pursue this in detail over the next 2 days. Thank you very much. That was great. Spectrum of alkaloids working on you from 10 different directions in the middle of this. The wonderful thing about chacruna, the Psychotria viridis, the admixture, the normal admixture to ayahuasca, is when you do an HPLC or a mass spec on that, it's just DMT. It's a pure spike of NN-dimethyltryptamine, nothing else hanging on to it. And I think they are such subtle folk chemists that they have discerned this, not only located every possible source of DMT in this ecosystem of several 100,000 species, but then discerningly focused in on those that have the cleanest of these signatures. So it's a very impressive thing. And to what end, you may ask? I mean, somebody asked me, do they just take these things for fun? And the answer is not at all. They are regulating their psychic world. They are when ayahuasca was first described by people like Richard Spruce and Theodore Koch-Grünberg and these early people into the Amazon, they spoke in terms of a telepathic drug. They felt that these small groups of deep forest Indians were actually entering into group states of mind with this stuff. Well, then, in the sort of hard reductionist era of pharmacology, this was, of course, completely poo-pooed and dismissed. But now, with our planet in crisis, I think we need to go back and look at this. I have had extraordinary experiences in ayahuasca sessions. Kat isn't here, so she can't tell the story, but some of you may recall the story. In Don Fidel Mozambique's circle, he had a nephew. This guy was worthless. He was a small-time weed dealer, part-time pimp, mostly ne'er-do-well, but because he was the sobrino, the shaman's nephew, he couldn't just be tossed out. And he would come to these ayahuasca sessions, and the shaman, Don Fidel, Don Jose, the old guys, would sing these beautiful songs in Quechua, and he would sing against them. He would sing while they were singing. He would sing a different song. And these people, I don't know how true it is generally in Peru, but these Loretanos, the people of Loreto, are such fine people, they will never directly confront a social outrage. So everybody in the circle was uncomfortable with this guy, didn't want him back. It was the main topic of conversation when we all weren't loaded. But when we were loaded, there he would be, hassling the group. So finally, after about the third time this came, there were about 30 of us in the shed. Don Jose, this older guy, had made the ayahuasca, and he was quite proud of it. He was showing it off, and it was god-awful strong. And Don Jose, the sobrino, was sitting across from me, and as these waves of hallucination would come, I would see him, and he would turn into like a monkey, a howler monkey, or a monkey with a dog's face, and just these weird animal transformations, and everybody else was staying the same. Well, Kat, who is a little less mealy-mouthed than I am, finally had all she was going to take of this guy, and we were all sitting there, and she just looked across the room. She just gave him what in English parlance is called a look that would kill. And he physically staggered backwards. And what I saw was these red darts come out of her eyes and go across the room. The singing stopped. Yes, the singing stopped instantly, and Don Fidel turned to one of the old guys and said, "She sends those..." And the other guy said, "Yes," and it was just this. It was a telepathic group experience where someone had been able to zing somebody else, and 30 people had seen it as a real thing. Well, I think the potential for this kind of thing for problem solving is immense.
Well, the thing I used to be in politics as we have them today.
Do you want to say something? No? Well, and you see, what they'll tell you in the Amazon, these ayahuasqueros, is the purpose of each journey when it is not to cure. And the shaman I spent the most time with, he did public curing sessions on Saturday nights, and everyone was welcome. On Wednesday nights, he took double doses, and it was a very small, intimate group, and he said, "This is for knowing. Now we don't cure. This is to know and to see." And what this consisted of was the recovery out of the hallucinogenic state of what are called icaros. Icaros are magical songs, and the more of them you have, they are taught to you by the plant spirit, and the more of them you have, the more powerful a shaman you are. Well, these icaros, when you listen to recordings of them, they're quite beautiful, quite extraordinary. But when you're with the people, it's made very clear that an icaro is not something you listen to. An icaro is something you look at. You look at it. It is to be seen, even though it is made out of sound. As a composition, as a work of art, it is offered more in the vein of a painting than a song or a poem. What is happening is that in this group state of mind, the intentionality of the singer is beheld as a three-dimensional modality of light and of color. Well, this is like an ontological transformation of language itself. Language, you see, we have eyes, ears, and tactile sensory receptors. They break the world of incoming perception, the electromagnetic radiation and the acoustical waveforms falling on our bodies are canalized by the senses into these narrow streams of input, the visual input, the audio input, the tactile input. In the ayahuasca state, a synesthesia comes into being. Well, synesthesia in our context is a rare medical word, but if you know anything about Romanticism and the literary movements of the 19th century, the pursuit of synesthesia is what drove the French symbolists and the Romantics. They saw this melding of the senses as a higher, a transformation of the ontos of art, and I believe it so to be. I think that what history is for is to give us a technology that will allow us to share our hallucinations. And they, the people of the Amazon, these los tribus, the tribal groups, have perfected a shamanic technology that allows them to do the same thing. It's this ability to display to your intimates the contents of your own head that creates a larger organism than simply the ego. And there are so many problems here with translating these concepts from language to language. The shamans of the Amazon may not even grok fully that it is this collective state of mind that is so empowering to them and that we don't have. How do you know what it's like to be inside the clothing of another culture? Well, you don't know. But the modality, the benchmark that the pharmacological fact of the chemistry of consciousness gives you allows you to work out from a given a kind of map of what must be going on. That's why the shaman's remark that it's so hard to take ukuhe was interesting. It meant that, he was making a statement about the human condition. He was saying, it's hard for us to do this, just the way it's hard for you to do this. I've discussed this with mushroom shamans in Mexico and ayahuasqueros in South America. They say it is not easy to do this. It is not easy to plunge into this hallucinogenic maelstrom. No culture prepares you for the modalities of the psychedelic experience. A culture can give you personal authenticity, self-control, and courage. These things will serve you well, but in terms of preparing you for what you will experience, it's virtually inconceivable. I think that the great gift that is going to come out of ayahuasca is the ability to open our heads to each other, to truly de-individuate, to truly create for ourselves a group mind, and now on a global scale. You see, the masculine engineering mentality is just running along behind the feminist, shamanist parade, hardwiring all the changes into technology. The engineering mentality doesn't believe it unless it turns on with a red light when you hit the button. But all that the engineering mentality can dream of or ever accomplish, it's in place in this vegetable matrix, this other way of doing it that doesn't give you much to show. No Amazonian shaman can point to an edifice like the World Trade Center or an atom smasher or a moon probe and say, the genius of my worldview allowed me to create these things. But the genius of their worldview allows them to create authentic caring, reasonable transmission of gnosis from one generation to another, an ability to walk lightly on the earth, an ability to intuit the needs and feelings of other people. And this is what we lack, is any sort of emotional sensitivity, any sort of ability to call on the racial mind at its roots to authenticate us personally in moments of stress and crisis. This is the ego really is a poor substitute for authentic being. And it's the poor substitute for authentic being that we have, each and every one of us, opted for. Man, woman, oldster, child. The neurotic programming is so deep that it is very difficult to transcend it. You see, I think, and Nicole is certainly a part of this phenomenon, that what really has happened, let's just say in the 20th century, it is that anthropologists, ethnographers, botanists, geographers, linguists have gone out to the four corners of the globe, the wastes of the Kalahari, the Amazon jungles, the storm-beaten shores of Kerguelen, all of these places, and they have come back with information. These people copulate in this position. These people intoxicate with this kind of thing. These people treat wealthy people this way. These people treat homosexuals this way. These people believe identical twins are this and that. All these ideas and technologies in the form of drugs, basically. And every jungle has consciousness transforming potential within it. Not all equally, but no jungle, no ecosystem is so poor that you can't find a consciousness transforming element in it. Well, as we now sort through this vast smorgasbord of options, should we practice the oracular systems of the Azande? Shall we all become Mahayanas? Shall we take up Sufi practices? What is our relationship to the shamanism of Tierra del Fuego? As all of this is sorted out in a kind of evolutionary fury, certain things are going to come to the fore. And I think it's not the form, not the ritual, but the way in which these things empower being, empower the physiology, the felt experience of being, and empower the cognitive processing and the integrative processing that goes on between people. And in the world of paradisical Taoistic integration that I hypothesize preceded history still exists in the Amazon, in these basically in the ayahuasca complex, but then in all the other complexes that are the feathering out of the edges of that. The archaic consciousness lives. This is why I think we are so strongly drawn to involve ourselves with these archaic people, because we recognize that they have answers to questions that we couldn't even ask until the 1960s. Do you want to say anything about any of this, Nicole? Or shall we ask people for questions?
I would like to be asked questions. I like even to be interrupted when I'm talking and asked questions. What do you mean by that?
What is your experience with ayahuasca?
Mine?
What is your experience with ayahuasca?
Well, it's about the usual, I would say. Actually, they usually don't give me a strong enough dose, because they think I'm, an old lady indelicate or something. And so I haven't had such vivid experiences as so frequently, or such enduring experiences. I just get flashes on and off usually. It's very hard for me to convince anybody that I am really a very tough old lady. And so they give me, mine have been oddly disappointing usually. For example, one night I couldn't see anything except the temples in Thailand. And I'd seen those already, so I wanted to see something new. And very elaborate in Indonesian architecture. That wasn't what I wanted. And I kept saying, Senorita Ayahuasca, because that's the way you must address her. Please, turn it off and get me something else. But incidentally, the respect for such plants must always be shown, not only in your mind, but verbally and in the handling. When a witch doctor friend gave me first, he sang a song to it when he dug it up. And he sang, Dear Senorita Ayahuasca, I am very sorry to have you leave me, but you are going to Senorita Nicole. She will be good to you. She is a good person. You will love her. She will love you very much. Please grow big and strong and active. And that is the way you must transplant. Did you do that with yours?
Oh yes, and I blow tobacco smoke and the whole bit.
Very possible. But they are extremely aware of plant sensitivity, of course, and must always respect it. And the kernels these magical songs are so much a part. I was sometimes told that they didn't think the plants would work for me, especially when it was something they didn't want to give me, it was taboo, because I didn't know the song. Or if I knew it, I couldn't sing it properly, because nobody could who was not a Toto, for example. Did you have that experience?
Oh yes. And they're very proud of the difficulty of these languages. These languages are extremely difficult to learn. Nicole's experience of finding it difficult to get thoroughly loaded is somewhat typical. There are a lot of problems. I mean, it took me a long time to get stoned in a native situation, because they always gave me too little, because they're all little. And they had a notion of the dose, and it just would barely rock my boat when it was clearly very intense for them. if you find yourself in South America sometime pursuing these mysteries, you may have to resign yourself to drinking a lot of swill before you get to something swell. I didn't really understand ayahuasca till I made it, till I was able to repeatedly make it and each time add more Psychotria viridis to intensify the visions, and finally I got it where I wanted it. You see, one of the things there's so many things about ayahuasca that are interesting. It really is a unique thing. First of all, it is technically a drug in the sense that it's not a plant, it's not just one plant. With morning glory seeds, with peyote, with mushrooms, with datura, with cannabis. This is one plant. Ayahuasca is a binary weapon. You have two things which have to be combined for it to be effective. Well, now that not only means that it is a combinatory thing, potentially different each time, because the ratios are potentially different, it also brings the human element in very strongly, because it's going to be about who made it, in the same way that a souffle is about who made it, while a glass of water is not about who made it. And so personalities become involved here. Well then, because it's something made, it can be made strong or weak. It can be diluted. Now, if you're into it for the money, all you have to do is cut it 50% and you've got twice as much money and the stuff is half as good. This is familiar to all of you, I'm sure, who've dealt street drugs, this equation. You know, if you cut it by half, you make more money, but the stuff is garbage. Even liquor, the horror of cutting fine liquor and what that does to it. So you really have to know your guy or gal if it is the rare case when it is the ayahuasquera comes into the picture. There are ayahuasqueras. When Kat and I were in the Amazon in '76, we tracked down and spent time with Manuel Cordova Rios, who some of you may know. His book, The Wizard of the Upper Amazon, by Bruce Lamb, is about Manuel Cordova Rios. Well, when we met him in '76, he was 93. He looked 55, but he did die a couple of years later. But he was still curing people and seeing people. And he, well, that reflects on my story. Nicole says he was an awful liar. We went to him, he was in Iquitos, and we said, we want real ayahuasca, we want the real thing. He said, you have to leave Iquitos, everyone here is a liar, a mentirosa. So he said, there is a woman, Juana Gonzalez Obi. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
His story was that as a 17-year-old girl, many years before, she had contracted leprosy. And there was no cure available to her except that he cured her with ayahuasca, but not before she lost her hands and feet. So she was clearly a heavy-duty person and had a great reputation. And we pursued her to Pucallpa, to Yarinacocha, and we finally actually found her relatives. But she had gone to the Andes for a few months to cure. But in the process of trying to find Juana Gonzalez Obi, we met all these other curanderos. And this is often the way of it in the Amazon. You look for one thing only to have a reason for being there, and what you really are fated to find is something far different.
Serendipity is Amazon travel.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Hello.
And you'd better be good at it. Isn't it time for lunch or something?
It's getting close. Maybe we should break for lunch. It's a few minutes.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we could take a couple more questions.
We're talking about admixtures, and did you have any comment of admixture of the Torahs into the ayahuasca or romantic?
Did you ever deal with Brugmansia?
I've heard of it's being used in it, but I'm scared of Brugmansia. I have known personally one case in which it killed so many brain cells, cortical cells, that the man was totally incurable. Managers, nobody could help.
Yes. Besides the DMT, which is added to the ayahuasca to make it highly visionary, then there are what's called tertiary admixtures, a third component, and this is what Ken is asking about. There are many, many of these tertiary admixtures.
I have 20 or 30 listed.
And most of them, when you get them into the lab, are chemically complex. They are probably...
Some are quite useless.
Some are useless, but some, I'm sure, push it all over the map.
Yes.
And in Datura is certainly one. Brugmansia is one. There are abuta species. There are a number of these. But I'm still trying to master the two. I have in Hawaii many of these tertiary admixtures, but that's real magic. That you don't get. Pardon me?
You have to test those things before you use them.
Yes, because they could be mutagenic. And a lot of people, really terrible things go on in Peru. I mean, you have to be sure of your ayahuasquero. I had some friends who went to Lamas near Tarapoto, and they documented an ayahuasquero there who, when his ayahuasca was all done, just to give it the proper zing, he would hit it with a tablespoon of creosote. Well, creosote is not only awful, paint it on a mouse's ears, and 2 weeks later the mouse will have tumors on its ears. It's about the worst thing you could possibly come up with.
All sorts of things. I knew of one who put kerosene in it.
Yeah, kerosene.
Kerosene, of course, is considered a great cure for snake bite.
Right, they always want
I remember landing in a village when, if anybody was sick, I had a lot of good medicines with me. In the early days when I didn't know so much about didn't believe in plant medicines. And they said, yes, there was a man there who had been bitten by a snake, a feather lance, a few weeks before, and he still wasn't well, though he'd had 2 whole bottles of kerosene.
Yeah.
I remember that Don Juan would teach Carlos about singing songs with mescaline, and with the ayahuasca, there's songs. Are there songs?
Yeah.
Are there songs to learn with the magic mushroom?
Yes, I think singing is sound, and language is what this is all about. I mean, we are not given to this, or I suppose I shouldn't make a generalized statement, but it's not my general tendency to burst into joyful song. But on the mushroom, voice, the purity of tone, the control, the almost synthesizer-like stability of the tone is shocking. Plus you can see it. You swipe this way and you leave a chartreuse trail. You come down through it this way with a magenta stripe. You are sculpting in this audio dimension. Yes, all of this small family of hallucinogens that I talk of with such enthusiasm, they're all related. Psilocybin is a tryptamine. Ayahuasca is a pharmacological strategy for activating DMT. The snuffs from the kumala trees are DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. The drugs, the compounds that interest me are vanishingly small compared to the whole cornucopia of pharmaceutical nature. I'm not into the whole cyclicized amphetamine series, including MDMA and MDA. I find that not very compelling. The short-acting anesthetics ultimately seem to me to be somewhat uninteresting. I'm just a fanatic for this one thing because I want to very strongly make the point that, altered states, there are just thousands of altered states. Panic, love, despair,
hatred, loathing, anxiety, and boredom, and drug states. You know, two scotches and an Irish coffee, all of this stuff. But what I'm interested in is this very specific thing that seems to me so transcendental and peculiar. It isn't a mirror to self. These tryptamines ultimately will be superseded in psychotherapy by something else, because they're not the best instrument for looking at the cracked personality. What they are is a tremendous instrument for looking at the invisible dimensions of the larger universe of mind. That's what they are for. So I think you should be through your stuff before you come to this. It will psycholytically clean you out. The first few trips will then be directed toward your stuff. And many people never push beyond that. They just say, my God, it was so horrible dealing with my fears and anxieties and stupidities and self-betrayals that I'm never going to go back. But if you will persist, eventually it no longer becomes about you. You become the small figure in the foreground of a vast and unfolding cosmic drama, not a personal drama. And that's the shamanic perspective. And every shaman must go through this shedding of personal identity to then reach an accommodation with it. That's why when I encounter the mind behind the plant, what I always say to it is, show yourself, reveal yourself. Let me see as much of you as I can stand. Don't tailor it for me. Don't kowtow to my needs. Push me to the limit. Let me see as much of your quintessence as I can imbibe without overflowing. Well, we'll talk more about this afternoon. Thank you very much. Good. Dealt with? Yeah.
Yeah, you suggest that shamanism is like the way to get man into a harmony with earth and sort of back to nature sort of thing. Are there other ways, and if there are, do they have any commonalities?
Well, I guess shamanism is what has been focused in on as the overarching metaphor, because all of these potential responses seem to lead somehow in that direction. I mean, the concept of shamans spans the notion in the modern usage from manager to poet. So it's a pretty broadly based concept. It's exalting a superior form of planning, which we could use some of at this point here. Okay, well, what we thought we would do this afternoon is I would talk for a little bit, and then maybe Nicole would respond to that if she felt like it, and then we would leave more time for questions than we left in the morning. I think both Nicole and I feel that the fruitful thing, the most interesting thing, is the questions, because left unquestioned, I tend to fall into my own creodes of habit and just repeat certain favorite numbers. But if you want to jog it in some different direction or cast it in a different light, then the question thing is good for that. The subject matter of this weekend is Amazonian shamanism, specifically named in the title. And I think this gives us permission to talk more about some of the details of shamanism in the Amazonian situation than we might in a weekend that was devoted to the planetary crisis generally, or some of the broader cosmic themes that I sometimes deal with. But I think one thing that is a common thread from the cosmic view to the particularized sensitivity to what is happening in the Amazon is the content as we can describe it of what these shamans are experiencing. Can we build a common language about this other dimension? And if we can, what does this common language begin to look like? So I thought this afternoon I would just remind you of some of the old metaphors for this alternative dimension, the beta matrix, the other realm, and then some possible new wrinkles on it. And I'm speaking now particularly of the intensified states that are associated with this shamanic complex of plants based on tryptamine. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. DMT is rarely distributed in any plant in sufficient quantity that it can trigger an unambiguous intoxication without somehow being concentrated. Either you have to extract and concentrate the bark, or you have to do a hot water extraction of the leaf, or in some way it has to be concentrated. Yet nevertheless, over the millennia, people have located the sources of this phenomena and spared no effort to make it available in a religious and shamanic context. Well, so what is it? The experience is can be very compressed and brief. In a typical DMT experience where it has been smoked, the onset of the experience is on the order of 30 seconds and the duration on the order of 5 to 7 minutes. With ayahuasca, and sometimes the way the tribal people do it is they boost it. They take a second hit some hours into the thing. You can prolong these states of intense visionary synesthesia for hours. But, yeah?
Is the DMT content in Beretta enough to get off the smoke the leaves?
No, I don't think so. A typical dose of ayahuasca that would be highly visionary will have 85 wet weight grams of Psychotria viridis in it. I would estimate that to be close to maybe 15 grams dry weight of Psychotria. And that amount of DMT, if smoked by itself, not in the presence of an MAO inhibitor, would not be effective. You see, the genius of the ayahuasca pharmacology is that beta-carboline alkaloids like harmine and harmaline are being used to lower the threshold of sensitivity to DMT, so that a dose of DMT that would normally be not perceived is in fact, absolutely flattens you, because your sensitivity has been raised by the inhibition of these enzyme systems. Well, what is this like experientially? Well, it's as though, in the first 5 seconds, the room clears of air. Everything, all colors brighten. It's as though the air has been sucked out of the room. Everything brightens. There's a generalized feeling of anesthesia, perhaps localized in the skin. And then you close your eyes, and there is a mandalic formation of undifferentiated red and orange. This is some kind of, what you're actually seeing is the bow shock of this gradient of unusual neurochemistry hitting the synaptic membrane. One by one, the synapses are giving up their normal affinity for serotonin and instead converting over to the bioelectric dynamic molecule that is being suddenly offered to them. And as this occurs on the scale of millions and then tens of millions of synaptic locations, a higher cortical experience comes into being. There is a sound like the compression of a cellophane wrapper, a kind of crackling sound, and then a penetration into this alternative reality, some kind of a modality of light and distance and dimensionality that is somehow inhabited. This is the real shocker for the modern positivist, reductionist mind, that it is a world of spirit, of animate intelligence, of comprehending and relating that suffuses every atom of existence. And if you ask a shaman, what is this? He will answer without hesitation, oh, well, it's the realm of the dead, it's the afterlife, these are our ancestors. What he doesn't explain is why one's ancestors should look like they're made out of gold and brass and be puttering around like jeweled basketballs, speaking in hyperdimensional syntactical languages which condense on the floor in front of you. Apparently, these are questions which are reserved for a deeper level of initiation. But in any case, they say, oh, these are the ancestors. Well, this is I've been in this biz for 20 years, and at some time in the past I must have faced this and repressed it. But recently it has come to me what a stunning denouement this would actually be if this is truly and in fact what shamanism is about, and that we merely have to open ourselves to what these people are saying. And what they are saying is there is a chemical technology for accessing the beyond, this higher mathematical manifold where that which has been and that which will be is somehow kept, some Blakean domain of potentiality that can be accessed. This would explain this hair-raising sense of familiarity that attends the contact with the utterly bizarre and unexpected. So that when the cognitive dissonance that accretes itself around this ecstasy is composed of two parts. It is that, my God, I can't believe this is happening, or even that I could perceive it if it were. And the second part is, this is totally familiar to me. This is more familiar than any other part of my life. This is my place. And the cognitive dissonance that ricochets between those places approaches unbearable. I was talking with a chemist a few weeks ago, an old friend of mine, and he was saying, well, what do you think about DMT in terms of risk? And I said, well, the risk is death by astonishment. That's what you're really courting. And, if you don't think that's possible, it's because you've never done this, because you pass that close. I mean, you just say, this is amazement on a spectrum which could kill you if you let it run out of control, because it is so intense. It is so improbable, and yet so familiar. Well, if it were somehow tied into this afterworld domain, this would all begin to make a certain weird kind of sense. Rupert Sheldrake has suggested what he calls necrotic biochemistry, that the dying process is actually the process of release of tryptamines into deep brain structure. Well, okay, so you've got this modality and there's stuff going on there. Well, what kind of stuff is it? Well, chiefly it seems to be a kind of domain where information is being passed around. Information is being offered and it's being traded. And I've often tried in reconstructing these experiences to feel into where have I had this feeling before, this feeling which I now have